Got it.
Okay, nice to see you all.
Good morning.
We chatted for a second before we started recording, but let's like start again. Eric, sorry, not Erica. Wait, you're not Erica, you're Eileen.
You want to start over? We have a mulligan.
It's okay. We're just find this out. Eileen's here. Hi, Eileen.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm still recovering from pneumonia. It's coming along, but I'm really loving the beautiful weather, and I have birds all over my fountain, and you can have the windows open so you can hear both the fountain and the birds. So life is good.
It's a really nice time of year for that. Yes. And Cheri, how are you?
Doing well, thank you.
That's good. I am going to say it again. I said it before we started recording, but like, what business has it being Palm Sunday already? It's a little bit ridiculous, and I'm wrestling with that, but we are where we are. And we're gonna talk about gospel preview. There's no sermon on Sunday, you know that, right? Because we have the Passion Gospel. It's so long that it is a sermon in itself. I'll probably do a little kind of reflective moment at some point in the service, but I'm not going to preach a sermon. But for gospel preview, we're going to look at Mark 11, 1 to 11. Is that okay?
Mm-hmm.
Let me share my screen. Can you guys see it?
Yes.
Yes.
I can.
So I'm going to read a bit, and then I'll stop reading and hand over to one of you to read. And so let's just dive in. When they were approaching Jerusalem at Bethphage and Bethany near the Mount of Olives, Jesus sent 2 of his disciples and said to them, "Go into the village ahead of you, and immediately as you enter it, you will find tied there a colt that has never been ridden. Untie it and bring it. If anyone says to you, 'Why are you doing this?' just say this: 'The Lord needs it and will send it back here immediately.'" Somebody else jump in.
They went away and found a colt tied near a door outside in the street. As they were untying it, some of the bystanders said to them, "What are you doing untying the colt?" They told them what Jesus had said, and they allowed them to take it. Then they brought the colt to Jesus and threw their cloaks on it, and he sat on it.
Many people spread their cloaks on the road, and others spread leafy branches that they had cut in the fields. Then those who went ahead and those who followed were shouting, "Hosanna! Blessed is the one who comes in the name of the Lord. Blessed is the coming kingdom of our ancestor David. Hosanna in the highest heaven." Then he entered Jerusalem and went into the temple. And when he had looked around at everything, as it was already late, he went out to Bethany with the 12.
Let's pause. Think of a word or a phrase that jumps out at you from the reading that we're going to share now without describing why for a moment. Cheri?
Looked.
Eileen?
The Lord needs it.
I'm going to go with the word Cheri picked, looked, but I'm going to add looked around at everything as it was already late. He went out to Bethany with the 12. Okay, I'm going to read this again. It's going to come up on Sunday, but we're not going to get into the detail. We're not going to have a sermon on this. But it is the opening gospel reading for Palm Sunday from the beginning of the service. And it establishes the beginning of Holy Week with the triumphal entry of Jesus into Jerusalem. And we will process around the cathedral site. Now there's predictions of rain, so we're not sure if we're going to process all the way from Easter Park into the sanctuary, or if we're going to process from the breezeway into the sanctuary, which will be way shorter. But we'll make that decision when the weather firms up a little later in the week and we know where we're going. I hope we're going to go from Easter Park into the cathedral and replicate this procession. I'm going to read it to you again, and I just want you to think about what it must have been like on the day to be there with Jesus. but also in this context of Mark's gospel, think about all of the detail that he throws in about exactly what's happening. The other versions might not be quite as detailed. So I wonder if any particular details jump out and speak to you. So let me read it one more time. When they were approaching Jerusalem at Bethphage and Bethany near the Mount of Olives, Jesus sent 2 of his disciples and said to them, "Go into the village ahead of you, and immediately as you enter it, you will find tied there a colt that has never been ridden. Untie it and bring it. If anyone says to you, 'Why are you doing this?' just say this, 'The Lord needs it and will send it back here immediately.'" They went away and found a colt tied near a door outside in the street. As they were untying it, some of the bystanders said to them, "What are you doing, untying the colt?" They told them what Jesus had said, and they allowed them to take it. Then they brought the colt to Jesus, and they threw their cloaks on it, and he sat on it. Many people spread their cloaks on the road, and others spread leafy branches that they had cut in the fields. Then those who went ahead and those who followed were shouting, "Hosanna! Blessed is the one who comes in the name of the Lord. Blessed is the coming kingdom of our ancestor David. Hosanna in the highest heaven." Then he entered Jerusalem and went into the temple. And when he had looked around at everything, as it was already late, he went out to Bethany with the 12. I'll just let you absorb that. I'm going to see if I can copy this and put it into the chat. There you go. Because then I'll stop sharing the screen. Did you get that in the chat?
Yeah.
Great. What are you all thinking?
The one that came to mind for me was the throwing of the cloaks on the colt and
Yeah.
the putting of the cloaks on the road.
Yeah. That
That,
jumped out at you.
yes,
What did you think about it, Cheri?
I don't have any idea. It sounds like it's meant to be a thing of reverence,
Yeah.
but I really don't understand it. So
How about you, Eileen?
The thing that jumped out at me is a colt that has never been ridden. And I thought that was very interesting. And then they just threw a cloak on it and rode it. Like, how do you ride a horse that has never been ridden, who doesn't know how to act with someone on its back? Because usually you see him bucking and running and being all frothy and upset. And that just struck me. I'm like, wow, he just did that. The colt
Yeah.
just let him ride.
Yeah. It was vestry last night, and we read this text as the opening meditation for vestry. One vestry member, oh my goodness, my brain's gone blank. Who was it? Tori. She said that she'd heard, and this is fascinating for me, and I've been like thinking about it, but not quite connecting with it, and I haven't looked into it yet. Said that because Jesus was kind of half secretly kind of doing all of this, and was leading a group of disciples that was not really kind of super public, that actually the whole going and picking up a colt and having like a little code word, if anybody asks you about it, say the Lord needs it, was all set up ahead of time, was all kind of like a secret kind of code for him to be able to set up his entry into Jerusalem. And that the disciples didn't know that, but Jesus had set it up. And I was fascinated by that as a possibility. We also talked about the idea of the fulfillment of prophecy, the idea of a king coming in on a colt. I think it's from Zechariah, but I'd have to check. There are ways in which the gospel writers like to kind of write in such a way as to say this points to some prophetic comment about Jesus. And I love the cloaks on the back of the colt and also on the ground. Doesn't talk about waving palms here. It talks about taking branches down off of trees and putting it in front of the donkey or the colt. They spread their cloaks on the road, and others spread leafy branches as they had cut in the fields. And I don't know if it was muddy. Like I don't know if it was muddy, and so therefore they were doing that to make the pathway kind of clearer, and so that he wouldn't get bogged down, but also as a sign of honor. And like if they're putting their cloaks down, their cloaks are going to get filthy, like stomped on by the donkey into the earth and into the ground and into the trees and the leaves. That's interesting. And then the other thing that came up last night, and I'm fascinated by this, and I'm interested what you think. They entered Jerusalem, went to the went to the temple. He looked around, and then it was late, so he left. Like they kind of get there, and there's this whole triumphal entry, and it's all this excitement, and then it's like, oh, what are we going to do now we're here? I guess what the disciples might have said. And then Jesus is like, well, let's go to the temple. Okay. They go to the temple, and it's like, what's going on? Nothing. Okay. Where should we go? And then Jesus, or like one of the disciples, is like, well, we didn't book any rooms, so I guess we go back to Martha and Mary's house. And they're like, okay, let's go back to Martha and Mary's house. And then they kind of head back there. Because you know, Bethany is not that far from Jerusalem. They could get there in the evening. It was late. They were going to go stay with Martha and Mary and Lazarus.
Well, it's a very interesting bringing that piece out because, you know, I hadn't really registered it before. And so I contrast that with one of the things that I've been taught is that at the same time, I think it was Pilate was coming into Jerusalem on the other side of Jerusalem, and he was coming in with horses and with his military people and with music and, you know, the whole thing. And Jesus is like literally coming through the back door, coming in. And so I see that putting the you know, putting the branches down and putting the stems down is a way of saying, you know, we're not coming in on the stones that the Romans cut. We are coming in with the love and concern of the people who love us and love God.
Wow.
Yeah.
I've heard that as well in a sermon at this time of year, that Pilate was entering with all kinds of circumstance at another door. Jesus has got pomp and circumstance, but it's kind of a humbler kind. It's the people. And I hear what you're saying. Like maybe it's a smaller gate and there isn't a stone road. So the reason why they have to put the cloaks down and the branches down is a sign. It is muddy. It's an unmade road. It's a smaller entrance. It's more humble. And they're putting the cloaks down as a sign of respect, because then the colt doesn't have to like trudge through dirt or
dust.
Or dust.
You know, dust, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I also remember in one of the other readings, there's the line, I can't remember exactly, but somebody said, could you get them to be quiet? Everyone's shouting too much. And Jesus says, if I told these to be quiet, even the stones themselves would cry out, which is a line that I like. I can't remember where that's from. I have to go have a look. Let me see if I can find it.
I just love that thought that, you know, Jesus's pathway is protected, you know, even if it's just from mud or dust or whatever, from the people who love and worship God.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's just real powerful for me.
Okay, so Luke 19, quite a way into Luke 19. Some of the Pharisees in the crowd said to him, "Teacher, order your disciples to stop." He answered, I tell you, if these were silent, the stones would shout out. Um, kind of love that.
Yeah.
There was so much joy and enthusiasm going on that he couldn't have stopped them if he'd have tried. Yeah. Yeah. So what were you saying, Eileen, a second ago?
I was just saying that it's that Jesus's pathway was lined with the love and the care and the concern of people who loved him and who loved God.
Yeah.
And it might not have been, with the big horses and the trumpets and everything, but it was just as it was even better than the Romans coming in, because you had to yell and say, Hail Caesar, or else you got killed. And here are people willing to yell and hail Jesus and put their own, the symbol of their lives on the road, their cloaks and the things from their fields.
Yeah. Yeah. It's this triumphal entry, which is what begins Palm Sunday for us, the Sunday before Holy Week. I do want to just recall and remember that that this service itself has two themes. And I've always wrestled with that. It's the Sunday of the Palms and it's the Sunday of the Passion. We have the Palm service at the beginning, and then we move to the Passion Gospel, which we're not reading right now, but it's the very long gospel, and it's going to be from St. Mark this year, that kind of outlines everything that unfolds in the rest of Holy Week. And there's a real pivot point, or a kind of a change of tone partway through Palm Sunday. And it goes from the triumphal entry of Jesus on the colt with the palms waving and the coats being laid in front of him, to the really tragic story that unfolds in the rest of the week, in which he is being controversial, he's being challenged, he's arrested, he's tried, he's killed. And that's all what will unfold in the middle of the week, especially from Thursday through Friday. Then he's laid in the tomb, and we don't get to resurrection until Easter Day, which I'm not going to get to right now. But I really do like that pivot point, that shift from one to the next, from one kind of joyful theme to a darker theme. And I wonder what either of you think about that this Sunday.
I don't really have any special thoughts about it. It's just how we do it, it's just what we do on Palm Sunday. It's sort of like it tempers joy, it's tempering that the celebration with now life is going to come into this, and we're going to have some difficult times, but kind of remember the joy as we go into this other part. That's the most I can think of.
How about you, Cheri?
For me, one of the things that's always hard about Palm Sunday that comes up is I always question myself about when we get to the part where we say crucify him, it's like, would I probably have been one of the ones saying crucify him? I don't know. And so that's always it's a reflection on kind of what would I have believed back then with what was going on, and what do I believe now, and what will I carry forward? And so it's kind of just looking at that reflection on your faith. And so getting back to what Eileen said about that, people putting out their cloaks and everything was showing that their love of God and their love of Christ was what was carrying him into Jerusalem. It just made me think, oh, well, I can add that to the reflection. And it's kind of like, oh, then I won't, it won't be quite as, I don't know, painful, I guess is what I would say, because it's like, okay, so maybe I would have, I don't know if I would have made the right choice then if I was back there or whatever, but I do know that I love God and I do know that I love Christ, so I can carry that forward. And hopefully that will help other people enter into the relationship with Jesus as well. You know what I mean? So it's kind of like carrying that forward and we can carry. So it's kind of looking at it like we can carry that love forward, and hopefully that'll allow Jesus's light to enter into other people's lives as well. Just from us doing that, just from loving God, loving Christ.
Cheri, you said a lot there. You started out by saying, I wondered if I'd have been drawn into the crowd that shouted, "Crucify him." Which
Yeah.
means I wondered if I'd be peer pressured. I wonder if I would have been carried along with what everybody else was saying. I
Yep.
wonder if I'd have maintained independence.
Yep.
And you're saying, but I love God, I love Jesus. I wanna celebrate, and the palms and the cloaks being laid on the donkey are all like reminders of the compassion and love towards him and the celebration of him. And I like the fact that in what you said, you held those two things together. Like, I love him, I want to follow him. That's all great. Would I have lost my integrity in the middle of this week and followed one of the others, shouting, "Crucify him"? And as such, Holy Week holds up a mirror to all of us and asks us to think, who am I and what am I capable of? What might I do in this set of circumstances? Could I do absolutely the wrong thing? And I think it's honest to say, well, possibly I could have done. I don't know, but I could have done. But then I like what you said, Eileen, about joy, and the suffering of Holy Week tempering joy.
Yeah.
And you reminded me about the Godly Place story, which I think is called The Mystery of Easter, which is to be told in the season of Lent. And you get a bag with a bunch of jigsaw pieces in it, and you take them out of the jigsaw bag, and the bag is purple because Lent is purple, and you get them out and there's a purple side, and you get them out and you count them out and you recognize that there are, I think, six pieces, and you say, well, Lent is 6 weeks long. It takes a long time to prepare for the mystery of Easter, and you put each of the pieces down on the table or on the rug in front of you, and then you try and rearrange them and make the jigsaw make sense, and the jigsaw forms a purple cross. You say, well, the mystery of Easter ends with the sadness of Jesus dying, and then you talk about purple being the color of expectation, of mystery, Lent being a time to prepare. You recognize that Advent as a time to get ready for Christmas is 4 weeks long, but Lent is 6 weeks long. It takes longer to get ready for the mystery of Easter. And then you pick up one of the pieces and notice that it has another side, and you flip it over. And on the other side, it's white. And you're like, oh gosh, there's another side to this story. Like, yes, it's full of sadness. Jesus dies on the cross. It's full of darkness. The mystery is difficult to understand. But if I flip this piece of jigsaw over, I see there's white on the other side. And then you flip them all over and recognize they're all white on the other side. And you say that as we go forward from Good Friday into Easter, resurrection happens. And this thing, which was a source of great sadness, becomes the source of great celebration as death turns into resurrection. And then the conclusion of the story is, and this is like I still haven't quite fully processed, I guess, but sadness mixed with celebration is where we get joy from. Joy is about sadness that has been mixed with celebration. And joy is related somewhat to contentment or peace, perhaps. It's sadness that's been processed into joy. It's grief that's been turned into a happy memory. And I love the way that the Godly Place story ends that, but I also like the fact that you were saying that the joy is tinged with sadness in this week of Holy Week. And that says something about our lives. We can be joyful, we can celebrate, things can be wonderful, but we can also be reminded of sadness at any point. I talked a lot, and I should pause for a moment and see what you think of that. If that resonates, or if that's a complex idea that's too much to hold on to.
No, godly play is great. It brings it down to a level where I can understand it. And I know it is, you know, sorrow and joy are an interesting thing. I was, my dad's birthday was St. Patrick's Day. And I was doing something and I saw a little green thing and I went, oh, it's Dad's birthday, you know, and so I went and looked on YouTube and got those brothers that do the Irish tap dancing, you know, in various places. So I put a copy of that and I sent it to my brother and said, you know, happy birthday, Dad. And so it's like, you know, he's gone, but yet we can remember that piece joyfully. So that's just an example of how we do find, you know, joy at times out of something that's sad.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What do you think, Cheri?
Yeah, I really don't have anything to add. I thought Eileen said it really well. So
yeah. Thank you for taking us to a tender place, Eileen. I think that's true. I think grief, I mean, you know what I think, you may know what I think about grief. Grief is painful, grief is difficult. We feel intense pain, loss, and sometimes a lack of meaning. As we process it, as we feel it, as we lean into it, it begins to shift and move. Grief felt can turn into energy. Memories of sadness can turn into memories of happy moments. I appreciate you saw that fleck of green, and then that fleck of green reminded you it was St. Patrick's Day, which reminded you of your dad, and you got to watch a joyful picture. I don't know if he liked the Irish dancers. That was something he loved. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so then that took you to a happy memory. And the happy memory is tinged with sadness, which becomes joy. Do you ever see that Pixar movie Inside Out?
Yeah.
That was the lesson of the Pixar movie, which I actually thought was then a pretty sophisticated emotional subtext. The little girl was trying to deny sadness the entire time. She was trying to avoid sadness. And in the end, as she tried to avoid sadness, her emotions stopped functioning properly. They stopped working. She tried to just be happy the entire time, and it wasn't sustainable. When she recognized that every happy memory could be tinged with a bit of sadness, and that sadness and happiness could be combined, she found a much more robust way to navigate life. And I'm like, wow, that was profound. And basically said what the Godly Play story says, which is that joy is a combination of sadness and happiness. But I do want to not, I don't want to lose what Cheri said, which is, what would I have done this week? Would I have been the good guy or the bad guy? Would I have been on the side of the people laying the branches and the cloaks? Or would I have been crying, crucify him? And when we get to the Passion narrative on Sunday, you know, we're going to have the whole congregation say, crucify him. And really, that's a reminder that we are all capable of destructive behavior towards other people. And that part of Easter is us recognizing that. And we can be in denial as much as we like. We can say, no, I'm not like that. I'm a good person. I don't do that. That's not me. But that's us being in denial. And one of the things that Holy Week invites us to do is to look squarely at ourselves and say, no, I could have been flawed. I can be flawed. I am. And let me acknowledge that in the midst of this story, and recognize that that thought doesn't crush me. but that I can continue on the story with Jesus, the divine person who will die, and it will be sad, and I will be implicated in his death, but then I might also be involved in his new life and transformed by it. So I'm preaching now. I wasn't going to do that. I want to go back to the last line, because it's fascinating. Then he entered Jerusalem and went into the temple, and when he had looked around at everything, as it was already late, he went out to Bethany with the 12. It feels so anticlimactic in the middle of the story. Like, okay, I guess we've done all that. What now? Oh, well, I guess let's go home. Maybe Martha and Mary would have made some dinner. Maybe we can sit and chat to them. And they don't mind us staying there. There's nowhere to stay here in Jerusalem. Let's just go home. And at the end of a busy day, at the end of a busy festival, at the end of a busy anything, you have that moment when you just go home and flop. Well, I do. I don't know about you.
Yeah, we all do.
Yeah. It's kind of a prosaic moment.
Yeah. And it's kind of interesting that it says, and when he looked around at everything, I'm like, I was like, why did Mark include that in the, because, all the other details, it's like, okay, I know why he included, okay, I get that, but it's like, why was that important? I'm trying to figure that part out.
Well, let me show you my one theory about Mark, or not my one theory, but one of the theories about Mark, which is Mark is a shorter gospel than all the other gospels. And it has a lot less stories, but each of the individual stories are often longer than the other gospels. And he does include detail that you don't understand why. So I think that sentence at the end is fascinating. And one theory is that Mark was the earliest gospel, and it was written down as he was listening to perhaps Peter telling these stories. So it might have been him following Peter and Peter being the one preaching. And it was from Peter's memory, and this is how Peter remembered it. And that Matthew captured lots of little detail. So one other place where that happens is in the feeding of the 5,000. The feeding of the 5,000 is a popular story. It's in all of the Gospels. It's a little bit longer in its writing, I think, in Mark. And there's an interesting detail, which it says, when they sat down in the field, the grass was green. Why tell us that? Like, is that essential? And the thing is that Mark wasn't composing it quite like Luke and Matthew were, or John, with kind of all of the theological intent. Some of it, I think, was listening to the stories as told by somebody. And so the detail reminds you of the detail that could be in someone's memory, and it's fresh. But also it does tell you stuff. So the grass being green in the feeding of the 5,000 tells you that it was in the springtime. The hillside hasn't got dry yet, like it does in California, and goes brown. The grass is green like it is right now. So perhaps we're being told that the feeding of the 5,000 happened in the springtime. And what does that resonate with? Here he's saying he went into the temple and he looked around at everything, and it was already late, so he went to Bethany. It might just be the way that Peter remembered it.
Yeah.
And the detail got in the text, which gives it, for me, a ring of authenticity. Not that I'm saying the other gospels aren't authentic, but like there's something about this that is like a remembered story. Yeah, we got to the temple and nothing was going on. We looked around, there was nothing happening. So we went back to the house.
Yeah, which is what you would do.
Yeah. Listen, let me read this to you one more time and ask a different question. The question now is, what is God asking you to do now in the light of this reading? Okay. When they were approaching Jerusalem at Bethphage and Bethany near the Mount of Olives, Jesus sent 2 of his disciples and said to them, "Go into the village ahead of you, and immediately as you enter it, you will find tied there a colt that has never been ridden. Untie it and bring it with you. If anyone says to you, 'Why are you doing this?' just say this: 'The Lord needs it,' and will send it back here immediately. They went away and found a colt tied near a door outside in the street. As they were untying it, some of the bystanders said to them, "What are you doing untying the colt?" They told them what Jesus had said, and they allowed them to take it. Then they brought the colt to Jesus and threw their cloaks on it, and he sat on it. Many of the people spread their cloaks on the road, and others spread leafy branches that they had cut down in the fields. And those who went ahead of those who were following, shouting, "Hosanna! Blessed is the one who comes in the name of the Lord. Blessed is the coming kingdom of our ancestor David. Hosanna in the highest heaven." Then he entered Jerusalem and went into the temple. And when he had looked around at everything, as it was already late, he went to Bethany with the 12. What is God asking you to do in the light of this reading now, Eileen?
It has something to do with how am I preparing my life, my path, my understanding to accept, to invite Jesus into it more fully.
Thank you. Cheri?
I honestly don't know. So I'll have to think about it.
That's okay.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about how this is taking me by surprise, because it's March the 20th and we're getting ready for Palm Sunday and it's so early. And I've been thinking about Easter being early all week, because it's inconvenient. It's disrupting my pattern for the year in some ways. And then I'm like, couldn't we just standardize Easter on a regular Sunday, like maybe the third Sunday of April? And then I thought to myself, no, it's good to be surprised by it sometimes. It's good to be taken unawares. It's good to be not quite as ready as you might like to be, because it didn't happen at a convenient time for Jesus. It just happened. And it's happening for us now. And I'm happy to be surprised by it, even though it's so familiar.
Mhm.
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 Shall we pray?
Mhm.
Yes.
God be with you.
Also with
Also
you.
with you.
Loving God, surround us with your love. We're your children. We love to follow you. But we also know it would be so easy for us to abandon that path and get drawn into a mob, a group of people that are set on hurting others. We thank you for this story that holds up a mirror to us, invites us to contemplate who we are, invites us to change and to grow. Help us to do so, open to the difficulty of Holy Week being interwoven with the joy of Palm Sunday and the promise of resurrection around the corner, reminding us that joy is not just unabashed happiness, but is a mixture of grief and hope. Help us to find that joy. Amen.
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 Thank you, guys.
Thank
You're
you.
welcome. Thank you.
I'm going to hit stop on the recording now.